Scope 2, also referred to as Part 2, covers pre-harvest risk assessments, sanitation and hygiene in the field, and harvesting and transportation activities. Pre-harvest risk assessments are used to check the intended harvest area for signs of wild animals or other potential hazards. An auditor would want to see records showing these regular assessments.
And as far as traceability goes, we started out isolating blocks and giving them different names. And the way our orchard's set up at this time, it was confusing. So each day I write down, what varieties we picked and who picked them. But essentially I turned it all into just one harvest block because I figured if we were to have a problem with a food safety issue, that it would be, in an orchard our size, it would be hard to say it was just this one spot and we could pick somewhere else. I think if there's a food safety issue, we're just shut down for the year. So I just made it all one block, and we trace essentially by the harvest date.
Okay.
And so every box we ship out has a sticker on it with our name and a stamp of the date it was harvested. And so, if something happens, we can know, where it possibly was. But I really think if something happened, we're just shut down for the year, and that's it. I doubt that something will happen, though.
Right. Have you had a chance to do a mock recall?
We haven't done that yet for whatever reason, but we're always available to do it.
Sure.
So, and it's have to get with the Western Montana Growers Co-op to do that.
And do you feel like it's an acceptable risk to maybe have a recall at some point that would be an entire day's worth of product versus where you had it broken up earlier in the blocks where you might have had less potentially, or do you feel like it would just be such a...
Well, it depends on what happened, I think.
Right.
And and we could very easily isolate it to a different area if that came down to it.
Yep.
But I suspect, if you go to Washington, most of the blocks that people have are bigger than our whole orchard.
Right. Sure.
So.
Sounds good. So Dylan, I'm looking through the checklist, and there are a couple of questions about how you're using your harvest bins, and I want to make sure that the produce isn't going to come into contact with the ground, and also that you're making an effort to reduce the amount of dirt that's on the harvest bin so that when you're putting them in the truck, taking them back to your warehouse, that's kind of minimized. So can you tell me a little bit about that system?
Yeah, definitely. We basically have two different harvest bins that we use. We use cheapo Walmart Rubbermaid totes for all of our greens that are a little bit lighter. And in order to not have muddy bottoms going back in our transport vehicles and into our cooler, we double stack. So we have bins that we put on the bottom, and as we move down the row, we can just kind of drag the tote along, and then once it's full, we pop it out, put a lid on it, label it, and put it in the vehicle, and the bottom's totally clean, and there's no risk of any soil-borne contaminants on our produce. Then our other bin that we use for anything heavier than the greens are these guys, and we do the same system. We just keep one on the bottom in order to minimize that soil contact.
Great. And then I noticed when we pulled up, there were some workers who were cleaning out the bins, things like that. So what's your system from when you process the produce in here, and then how does it get back to here? How does it get cleaned in the meantime?
Yep. So our system that we normally use 3 times a week, kind of after all of our big harvest days, we have a washing and sanitizing setup in our pack shed. And the basic process for that is we stack all of our bins against a wall on a pallet system, pressure wash them out, get all of the dirt off of them, and then we have a tank filled with water with sanitizer in it, and we just dunk everyone through and then make a massive pyramid to dry them out. And then once they're dry, we restack them, and so generally before any of our harvest days, we just have our clean bins available to bring over. What you saw today is we had just picked up bins from one of our accounts that we deliver in our bins, and if we don't have them clean in the pack shed, we'll use a spray bottle full of sanitizer and just actually spray out the bins and dry them so that we know we're good to go if we don't have time to do it in the pack shed.
Great.
So anytime before we harvest, we always use a clean, sanitized harvest container.
Awesome. And then what about the harvesting tools? Do they go through a similar cleaning step between, or?
Yep. So at the end of every day, we basically have same process, clean all the dirt off of, so spraying and dunking in a bucket if we need to get mud or something off of there, and then having a second bucket with sanitizer that those go through. So one of the issues we've had in the past is kind of how to handle all of the different harvest materials that we use for like twist ties, rubber bands, things like that. We've pretty much switched entirely to a twist tie system for our bunch roots and greens, and we use a harvest tool belt, which we carry our knives, snips, whatever harvest tools we need, and they have this handy dandy little slot that we found we can put our twist ties through, and so we're able to count out our 24 twist ties or 30 if it's parsley, whatever our count is. We have those there, and then as we're going along, after we cut and harvest whatever the crop is, we can just pull one of these out and twist tie the bunch, and then put it in our harvest container, so it keeps these clear of getting any dirt on them or somebody putting them in their pocket, whatever it is, and it is just really nice as far as efficiency to be able to just pull it out really easily.
Field sanitation and hygiene includes hand washing policies, the availability of toilets for workers in the field, and, if they're used, a few policies about managing portable toilets, also called field sanitation units. Field harvesting and transportation will include policies for harvest containers, harvest tools and machinery, glass on harvesting equipment, chemical, petroleum, and pesticide contamination, packing materials, transportation to the packing area, and traceability during harvest. Harvest tools, machinery, containers, and materials all need to be either new or cleaned on a scheduled basis and should be in good repair. For traceability, an auditor will check to make sure the produce being harvested is identified in the field in a manner that allows the lot number to stay associated with the appropriate produce when it arrives at the packing house.
So Dylan, one of the questions asked about having produce covered from when it goes from the field back to your packing house, which is at a different location. So can you tell me about how you're making sure that's covered and whether you decided to do that or not, stuff like that?
Definitely. So we basically have two different harvest vehicles that we're using now. One is this box truck, which my grandparents gave me. They had a farm in Minnesota, and retired this year. So I drove out to Minnesota and grabbed their box truck. And you can see the shelving in here. They grew potted plants and sold them at the St. Paul Farmers Market. And I've kind of taken that on also. And so we've kept the shelving in here because it's really handy for transporting those. So that's what we use it for in the spring. But during the season, we harvest from the field and then kind of use the back of the truck as a place to weigh and label stuff that comes in from the field, and kind of we try to do every hour we've got another run going back to our other location. So like we're at the Stuckey farm right now, and our pack house is 2 miles down the road. So every hour, try to have a full truckload and send it back. And the reason we do every hour is to keep product cool. And so it's in the shade once it's in the truck. But then we get it back to the pack shed and it immediately gets washed and packed and then goes in the cooler. So it's basically like an hour and a half cycle, depending on, or for the crop that was the first harvest, the first thing harvested before it's just in the cooler for usually about 24 hours before it gets shipped out. So for our field to pack shed traceability, we use these labels, and we're using these right now because we rebranded this year and these are just old labels that we had. So basically in the date slot, we're putting our lot number, and so this is S222, and the S stands for Stuckey, which is the property that we harvested at, and then 222 is the date, and we use a Julian calendar, so it's the date that we harvested this product from Stuckey, and we write what the product is, so it's red kale 18 count. And so once this makes it back to the pack shed, when it's packaged up with whoever the destination is that it's going to, this lot number carries over, and that new box with the label has the same lot number, so we always know exactly where and when anything that goes out was harvested. And in the pack shed, this lot number is also recorded. We have a sheet where we record every box for every day with the lot numbers, so we have a secondary way of keeping track of that.
Great. So Dylan, we're over here in sort of the back portion of one of your fields, and I just noticed that there was a vehicle that's being used, and I was curious if you could tell me how that vehicle is used. It seems like a different one than the harvest trucks that you're usually using. So what's going in there, and how are you making sure that's a clean space?
Yep. So since we're managing 4 different properties, for certain crops that have to be harvested at the same time, we get into a pinch of not having enough vehicles for different spots. So here at the Rocky Road farm, where we do all of our cut flowers, we generally just use my Subaru truck to get the flowers back to the pack shed. And we could use a cart, but it's a lot nicer to use a car, even though it's only a few hundred feet. And occasionally we do have to use it for vegetables, which here are things like all the solanaceous summer crops, cucurbits. We also have some broccoli here. So if we don't have one of our other harvest trucks available for that, we'll just do a quick inspection of the car and make sure it's clean it out if it needs to be. But everything is also in those containers. We're not just dumping anything into the back of the car. There is a barrier between the car as well, but we clean it out before we use it for vegetables.
Great. The other thing that I've seen at farms where they end up using vehicles is they'll just throw a tarp down, then they don't have to worry about if that's a vehicle they use for other things.
Right.
It's just a real quick, easy barrier, and that's just a tarp that they use only for when they're transporting goods. So that's another option as well.
That is a good option. It's easier.
Okay. Sounds good. And then traceability, it was a little bit unclear to me how that is working with your CSA. Do you want to talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, sure. So we do week-to-week opt-in, opt-out deliveries. So
Okay.
we're not a season-long subscription CSA. But we also do online ordering. So we have a digital record of exactly what was sold to whom. So the items in the box that ties back to our harvest checklist, location in the field, how it was processed, and then the exact customer that bought that week.
Okay.
Yeah,
Gotcha.
yeah. So it's not necessarily all one record, but you can link them together if you need it.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
You could figure it out.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And is this part of that documentation system?
Yeah, so right here, this is going to be our harvest checklist, and what we have is for each row is an item. So we have the item, and I'll just go with the top row. We have asparagus. We have the date it was harvested. We've got how the food contact surfaces were treated or handled. How any spray, rinse, or hydrocooling was handled, and so that would be your sanitizers, if they can come into play. And then over here we have how it was stored, so which cool storage, like fridge number 1, fridge number 2, was it kept in a tub, into plastic bags, and then often things will sort of go in bulk storage, and so we have another column over here. So when it comes out of bulk storage, if it gets repacked for delivery to the customers, it might go back into another storage, so even into a different fridge or something. And so we have space for that there. And then finally we cap it off with the delivery date for that item. So that takes us from date harvested, everything that happened to it, where it was kept, until it goes out of our hands.
Great.
Yeah.
And this is pretty easy to keep track of, just having it on this piece of paper, or?
Do you know what? It's a little bit of a work in progress, and in particular because there's several different, I guess, pathways that a particular item could take in that storage, packing, restorage. And so for now, this seems to be working, but we're open to changing that.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay, sounds good. So Dylan, we were just in your cooler and I noticed two things that I wanted to ask you about. One is on the far wall, it looks like there are a number of boxes that were dated previous to today, and I just wanted to see and check in about your traceability system and how that is working with that. And then also there were some cherries back in the back corner, which I assume you're not growing since you didn't see any cherry trees. So I'm curious how you're bringing that in, how you're making sure that is okay to have in your cooler, or how you're keeping things separate in the cooler.
Yep. Yeah, so the area you saw on the back wall is basically our cooler inventory. So we're harvesting 7 days a week. So some things will be in the cooler for 2 or 3 days before they go out, or before we receive an order for them. And so we're holding temperature there to keep product quality high and the produce as fresh as possible. And the lot number on those boxes is the lot number from the day they were harvested. And so if they're not already packaged up in their wholesale box with that label, if it's a bulk bin, we transfer the lot number that's on that bin onto the finished box with its label. All right, so on our boxes we have the lot number. So when we take something out of that cooler inventory, we have the field lot number on there, and when we repackage it, we transfer that lot number onto our final label for the final package. So we have a complete continuous flow from the field, knowing where things came from, what day. And at the end of every day, after all of our accounts orders are put together, we have another sheet that has every product for that day and every account that it goes to. And so we go through each account's pallet, their stack of boxes, and write the number on the box on that sheet, so that we have a full record of every day and every account, everything that we do. We can have that on one piece of paper.
Great. So it sounds like the lot numbers are being associated with the orders that they're filling.
Exactly.
That's great. And then what about the cherries in the back corner? How did you guys decide to get that in? How are you keeping that separate?
The cherries we brought in from Western Montana Growers Co-op, and they're a GAP certified distributor.
Great.
And so we're able to keep our GAP standards up.
Because they're certified.
Because they're certified, yeah.
Great.
So we know that they're doing what they need to do, and we keep those separate in our cooler from stuff that we're bringing in. So it's pretty easy with the cherries, because we don't grow cherries.
Yeah.
But if we had a product that wasn't from a GAP certified producer, we would have to have a separate way of dealing that. And the only place that we actually buy in from are GAP certified places. So
Great.
Again, that simplifies it.
Yeah. Great. Thanks. So Tom, we're out here in the field, and I'm just noticing a couple workers down the row working with carts and some harvest boxes. Could you tell me about your harvest process, the containers you're using, how you're keeping stuff either off the ground or on grassy areas like you mentioned in your plan, and then a little bit about the traceability from the field to the packing house to the final customer?
Okay, well we pick everything into those white plastic totes, and they And then we have it written in our plan that we can set them on the grass, like right here, because the grass is pretty clean. And when they get done picking, they usually set the tote on the garden, on the wagon, and pull it out. We used to drive the tractor down and put everything on the back of the tractor, but the trees typically are hanging down too far in the row to get a piece of equipment through there, and so we just started using the wagons, which we wash on a regular basis, and once they're done picking, they usually put the totes on the wagon, and then when the wagon gets full, they bring it down and set it at the end of the row. And oftentimes we set up our equipment or packing station at the end of the row so we don't have to move it. But today there's just a few boxes here, so they're taking it somewhere else to pack.
Gotcha.